Squirrels, I am so sorry. I've kept y'all waiting, and here we are at the end of the book. Look at my purdy from... It looks so pretty with the lights out, but I got a bunch of stuff to do all around my feet and right here. It looks so pretty with the lights out. It's $5 on the plus aisle. On the plus aisle at the Dollar Tree. All right, we were at a crazy place. Last chapter, not that much more. This Mrs. Lancaster is the one. What? Okay, back up a little bit. She said she was talking to Tuppence and getting ready to do something to her. She said, let me go back a bit. Then I got the command. I couldn't have any children. I'd married and I thought I'd have children. Then my husband wanted children passionately, but the children never came because I was cursed, you see. You understand that, don't you? But there was a way to atone. To atone for what I'd done. What I'd done was murder, wasn't it? And you can only atone for murder with other murders. This lady's cracked. Beyond cracked. With other murders. Because the other murders wouldn't be really murders. They would be sacrifices. They would be offered up. You do see the difference, don't you? The children went to keep my child company. Children of different ages, but young. The command would come, and then... She leaned forward and touched Tuppence. It was such a happy thing to do. You understand that, don't you? It was so happy to release them so they'd never know sin like I knew sin. I couldn't tell anyone, of course. Nobody was ever to know. That was the thing I had to be sure about, but there were people sometimes who got to know or to suspect. Then, of course, well, it had to be death for them too, so that I should be safe. So I've always been quite safe, you understand, don't you? Wow. Not quite. But you do know. That's why you came here, isn't it? You knew the day I asked you at Sunny Ridge. I saw by your face. I said, was it your poor child? I thought you'd come, perhaps because you were a mother, one of those whose children I'd killed. I hoped you'd come back another time, and then we'd have a glass of milk together. It was usually milk. Sometimes cocoa, anyone who knew about me. So she put stuff into milk or the cocoa, I guess is what they're saying. She moved slowly across the room and opened a cupboard in the corner of the room. Mrs. Moody, said Tuppence. Was she one? Oh, you know about her. She wasn't a mother. She'd been a dresser at the theater. She recognized me, so she had to go. Turning suddenly, she came towards Tuppence, holding a glass of milk and smiling persuasively. Drink it up, she said. Just drink it up. Tuppence sat silent for a moment, then she leapt to her feet and rushed to the window. Catching up a chair, she crashed the glass. She leaned her head out and screamed, "Help! Help!" Mrs. Lancaster laughed. She put the glass of milk down on a table and leaned back in her chair and laughed. How stupid you are. Who do you think will come? Who do you think can come? They'd have to break down doors. They'd have to get through that wall. And by that time, there are other things, you know. It needn't be milk. Milk's the easy way. Milk and cocoa and even tea. For little Mrs. Moody, I put it in cocoa. She loved cocoa. Remember her? The morphia, how did you get it? Oh, that was easy. A man I lived with years ago, he had cancer. The doctor gave me supplies for him to keep in my charge. Other drugs, too. I said later that I'll be thrown away, but I kept them. And other drugs and sedatives, too. I thought they might come in useful someday, and they did. I've still got a supply. I never take anything of the kind myself. I don't believe in it. She pushed the glass of milk towards Tuppence. Drink it up. It's much the easiest way. The other way, the trouble is I can't be sure just where I put it. She got up from her chair and began walking round the room. Where did I put it? Where did I? I forget everything now. I'm getting old. Tuppence yelled again, help! But the canal bank was empty still. Mrs. Lancaster was still wandering around the room. I certainly thought, oh, of course, in my knitting bag. Tuppence turned from the window. Mrs. Lancaster was coming towards her. What a silly woman you are, said Mrs. Lancaster, to want it this way. Her left arm shot out and she caught Tuppence's shoulder. Her right hand came from behind her back. In it was a long, thin stiletto blade. Tuppence struggled. She thought, I can stop her easily. Easily. She's an old woman, feeble. She can't. Suddenly, in a cold tide of fear, she thought, but I'm an old woman too. I'm not as strong as I think I am. I'm not as strong as she is. Her hands, her grasp, her fingers, I suppose because she's mad. And mad people, I've always heard, are strong. The gleaming blade was approaching near her. Tuppence screamed. Down below she heard shouts and blows. Blows now on the doors as though someone was trying to force the doors or windows. But they'll never get through, thought Tuppence. They'll never get through this trick doorway here, not unless they know the mechanism. She struggled fiercely. She was still managing to hold Mrs. Lancaster away from her, but the other was the bigger woman, a big, strong woman. Her face was still smiling, but it no longer had the benignant look. It had the look now of someone enjoying herself. Killer Kate, said Tuppence. You know my nickname? Yes, but I've subliminated that. I've become a killer of the Lord. It's the Lord's will that I should kill you, so that makes it all right. You do see, don't you? You see it makes it all right. Tuppence was pressed now against the side of a big chair. With one arm, Mrs. Lancaster held her against the chair, and the pressure increased. No further recoil was possible. In Mrs. Lancaster's right hand, the sharp steel of the stiletto approached. Tuppence thought, I mustn't panic. But following that came with sharp insistence, but what can I do? The struggle was unavailing. Fear came then, the same sharp fear of which she had the first indication in Sunny Ridge. Is it your poor child? That had been the first warning, but she had misunderstood it. She had not known it was a warning. Her eyes watched the approaching steel, but strangely enough, it was not the gleaming metal and its menace that frightened her into a state of paralysis. It was the face above it. It was the smiling, benignant face of Mrs. Lancaster, smiling happily, contentedly. A woman pursuing her appointed task with gentle reasonableness. She doesn't look mad, thought Tuppence. That's what's so awful. Of course she doesn't, because in her own mind she's sane. She's perfectly normal. Reasonable human being. That's what she thinks. Oh, Tommy, what have I got myself into this time? Dizziness and limpness submerged her. Her muscles relaxed. Somewhere there was a great crash of broken glass. It swept her away into darkness and unconsciousness. Somebody has come to save the day. Is it Tommy? Might be Amos. And second part. That's better. You're coming round. Drink this, Mrs. Beresford. A glass pressed against her lips. She resisted fiercely. Poisoned milk. Who had said that once? Something about poisoned milk. She wouldn't drink poisoned milk. No, not milk. Quite a different smell. She relaxed, her lips open, she sipped. Brandy, said Tuppence with recognition. Quite right. Go on, drink some more. Tuppence sipped again. She leaned back against cushions, surveyed her surroundings. The top of the ladder showed through the window. In front of the window there was a mass of broken glass on the floor. I heard the glass break. She pushed away the brandy glass, and her eyes followed up the hand and arm to the face of the man who had been holding it. El Greco, said Tuppence. I beg your pardon? It doesn't matter. She looked around the room. Where is she, Mrs. Lancaster, I mean? She's resting in the next room. I see, but she wasn't sure that she did see. She would see better presently. Just now only one idea would come at a time. Sir Philip Stark, she said it slowly and doubtfully. That's right. Yes. Why did you say El Greco? Suffering. I beg your pardon? The picture in Toledo or in Prado. I thought so a long time ago. No, not very long ago. She thought about it. Made a discovery. Last night, a party at the vicarage. You're doing fine, he said encouragingly. It seemed very natural somehow to be sitting here in this room with broken glass on the floor, talking to this man with the dark, agonized face. I made a mistake at Sunny Ridge. I was all wrong about her. I was afraid then, a wave of fear, but I got it wrong. I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid for her. I thought something was going to happen to her. I wanted to protect her, to save her. She looked doubtfully at him. Do you understand, or does that sound silly? Nobody understands better than I do. Nobody in this world. Tuppence stared at him, frowning. Who was she? I mean, Mrs. Lancaster, Mrs. York. That's not real. That's just taken from a rose tree. Who was she? Herself. Philip Stark said harshly, who was she? Herself? The real one, the true one? Who was she, with God's sign upon her brow? Did you ever read Peer Gynt, Mrs. Beresford? He went to the window. He stood there a moment looking out. Then he turned abruptly. She was my wife, God help me. Your wife? But she died. The tablet in the church. She died abroad. That was the story I circulated, and I put up a tablet to her memory in the church. People don't like to ask too many questions of a bereaved widower. I didn't go on living here. Some people said she had left you. That made an acceptable story, too. You took her away when you found out about the children? Now, who is she? Philip Stark. Ah. So you know about the children? She told me. It seemed unbelievable. Most of the time she was quite normal. No one would have guessed, but the police were beginning to suspect. I had to act. I had to save her, to protect her. You understand? Can you understand? In the very least? Oh, Lord. Yes, said Tuppence, I can understand quite well. She was so lovely once. His voice broke a little. You see her there. He pointed to the painting on the wall. Water Lily. She was a wild girl always. Her mother was the last of the Warrenders. An old family. Inbred. Guess so. Helen Warrender ran away from home. She took up with a bad lot. A gaol bird, that G-A-O-L word and bird together. Her daughter went on the stage. She trained as a dancer. Water Lily was her most popular role. Then she took up with a criminal gang for excitement purely to get a kick out of it. She was always being disappointed. When she married me, she had finished with all that. She wanted to settle down to live quietly a family life with children. I was rich. I could give her all the things she wanted, but we had no children. It was a sorrow to both of us. She began to have obsessions of guilt. Perhaps she had always been slightly unbalanced. I don't know. What do causes matter? She was... He made a despairing gesture. I loved her. I always loved her, no matter what she was, what she did. I wanted her safe, to keep her safe, not shut up, a prisoner for life, eating her heart out. And we did keep her safe for many, many years. We? Nellie, my dear faithful Nellie Bly, my dear Nellie Bly. She was wonderful. Planned and arranged it all. The homes for the elderly, every comfort and luxury and no temptations, no children. Keep children out of the way. It seemed to work. These homes are in faraway places. Cumberland, North Wales. No one was likely to recognize her, or so we thought. It was on Mr. Eccles' advice, a very shrewd lawyer. His charges were high, but relied on him. Blackmail? Suggested Tuppence. I never thought of it like that. He was a friend and an advisor. Who painted the boat in the picture, the boat called Water Lily? I did. It pleased her. She remembered her triumph on the stage. It was one of Boscawen's pictures. She liked his pictures. Then one day she wrote a name in black pigment on the bridge, the name of a dead child. So I painted a boat to hide it and labeled the boat Water Lily. Okie dokie, it's Water Lily. Door in the wall swung open. The friendly witch came through it. She looked at Tuppence, and from Tuppence to Philip Stark. All right again? She said in a matter-of-fact way. Yes, said Tuppence. The nice thing about the friendly witch, she saw, was that there wasn't going to be any fuss. Your husband's down below waiting in the car. I said I'd bring you down to him if that's the way you want it. That's the way I want it, said Tuppence. I thought you would. She looked towards the door into the bedroom. Is she in there? Yes, said Philip Stark. Mrs. Perry went to the bedroom. She came out again. I see. She looked at him inquiringly. She offered Mrs. Beresford a glass of milk. Mrs. Beresford didn't want it. And so I suppose she drank it herself? He hesitated. Yes. Dr. Mortimer will be along later, said Mrs. Perry. She came to help Tuppence to her feet, but Tuppence rose unaided. I'm not hurt, she said. I was just in shock, I guess. I'm quite all right now. She stood facing Philip Stark. Neither of them seemed to have anything to say. Mrs. Perry stood by the door in the wall. Tuppence spoke at last. There's nothing I can do, is there? She said, but it was hardly a question. Only one thing. It was Nellie Bly who struck you down in the churchyard that day. Tuppence nodded. I've realized it must have been. She lost her head. She thought you were on the track of our secret. I'm bitterly remorseful for the terrible strain I've subjected her to all these long years. It's been more than any woman ought to be asked to bear. She loved you very much, I suppose, said Tuppence, but I don't think we'll go on looking for any Mrs. Johnson if that's what you want to ask us not to do. Thank you, I'm very grateful. There was another silence. Mrs. Perry waited patiently. Tuppence looked round her. She went to the broken window and looked at the peaceful canal down below. I don't suppose I shall ever see this house again. I'm looking at it very hard so I shall be able to remember it. Do you want to remember it? Yes, I do. Someone said to me that it was a house that had been put to the wrong use. I know what they meant now. He looked at her questioningly, but did not speak. Who sent you here to find me? Asked Tuppence. Emma Boscawen. I thought so. She joined the friendly witch, and they went through the secret door and on down. A house for lovers, Emma Boscawen had said to Tuppence. Well, that was how she was leaving it, in possession of two lovers, one dead and one who had suffered and lived. She went out through the door to where Tommy and the car were waiting. She said goodbye to the friendly witch. She got into her car. Tuppence, said Tommy. I know, said Tuppence. Don't do it again, said Tommy. Don't ever do it again. I won't. That's what you say now, but you will. No, I shan't. I'm too old. Tommy pressed the starter. They drove off. Let's see, where did it go? Don't do it again, but you will. No, I shan't. I'm too old. Tommy pressed the starter. They drove off. Poor Nellie Bly, said Tuppence. Why do you say that? So terribly in love with Philip Stark, doing all those things for him in all those years. Such a lot of wasted dog-like devotion. Nonsense, said Tommy. I expect she's enjoyed every minute of it. Some women do. Heartless brute, said Tuppence. Where do you want to go? The Lamb and Flag? Where do you want to go? The Lamb and Flag at Market Basing? No, said Tuppence. I want to go home. Home, Thomas, and stay there. Amen to that, said Mr. Beresford. And if Albert welcomes us with a charred chicken, I'll kill him. And that is it. That's it, and that's all. I think what I'll do, if it takes a little bit of doing, but hopefully I'll remember to do it. Look up some last October, maybe the October before, several years, I guess. I've read little short stories. I think I've mentioned it. I'm sure I mentioned it fairly recently. So I'll just look for some kind of spooky, because that's what I like. Sorry if some of you don't. I've got lots and lots of books in the playlist. We got Anne of Avonlea, all those books. We got Little Women. There's a bunch of books in that series. There's a bunch of books in there. So if you don't care for the spooky stuff and stuff that I have to read that's in public domain and all that, it won't be all that. But I just think it's fun, and that's why. And that's all, like Miss Kelly said. I love y'all. Wasn't that a crazy ending? Be sweet, don't be ugly. Hope to see you tomorrow. Live at 5. Deni.